Hello, welcome back to the second part of understanding null safety in Flutter. In the first part of the video, we had learned how to implement null safety and make our application stable with data types like string, integer, etc. So in this video, we will focus more into complex objects. For example, in this demo, we had the address object and the company object. So we will try to implement null safety with these kind of complex objects. To understand how null safety works in Flutter, please watch the first part of this tutorial because this is the continuation of that part. Let's focus on the company object here for the null safety. We had made the company object non-nullable without the question mark. So that means it cannot accept null. So we can just simply remove the checking. And here also we can remove the question mark. So that means it can proceed to convert it to JSON because it can never be null. So that's our assumption. So we think that a proper value will come from the server. So if you go to the declaration part in the constructor, it's showing some error. So it's saying it cannot be null. So we need to have a default value for the company. So how do we set a default value? So just like we did for the string and the integer, we can just assign it in the constructor. So let's see how we can do it. So this dot company is equal to company object, but it's showing an error. That means we need to provide a constant value, but it still shows an error because our company constructor is not a constant. So let's make it a constant and the error goes away. If you want, you can set the values for each member inside the company with a default value. So we can set the catchphrase and the name and everything else to an empty value so that we can access it anywhere and it will not be a null. So let's extract it and create a variable default company is equal to and paste it there. And let's copy it. Let me format it a little bit. All right. Now let's copy the company, default company, and paste it in the constructor. So there is an error. That's because default company is not a constant variable. So let's make it a constant and remove the constant from the right hand side. Okay, so that's good. So that's how we can provide a default value for an object. You can use a similar method for the address object as well. Here we had made the address object nullable. So that means it can accept a null value. So here this approach will work even if the company key from the server is not present in the response. So we are parsing the response and using the JSON company value, and if the key itself is not present, it's just taking the default company. And what if the JSON company, the value itself is a null from the service, from the backend? So in that case, we need to do a null check just like we did for the name and ID in the previous video. So we can just use the check here is equal to null. If it is equal to null, we can set it to the default company that we had declared earlier. So we are taking care of the null value from the server here. So if you take the JSON name from the previous video, you can see that we are checking the null using this shorthand operator, double question mark. So that will check for the null and it will set it to empty. So let's see what if we, let me go to the user list row where we are setting the name. So that's how we set the name in the UI. So what if the name itself is a nullable variable? So I'm making it a nullable variable. So that means the UI will complain because it cannot accept a null, and we are setting it to an empty value, and here also it will complain because is not empty will be called on a null value. So we are unwrapping it, assuming that it will not be null. So we shouldn't do it. Even if we think if it is a null, we need to add a null check as well here. So which makes our UI logic much more complex and it doesn't look good. We shouldn't be doing this. We have to avoid all kind of null checks in the UI so that the code is much cleaner to look at and maintain. So let's go back to our parsing logic and let me undo all these things. Let's go back to our model file and undo the name. So the error is gone now. So let me show one more thing here. I'm wrapping the container with an inkwell and adding the tab. So we had made the onTap function nullable. So that means we can send null to this function variable. So it's complaining that it cannot call a function which can be null. So we'll just unwrap it for now. And what if it is null and the user is tapping on the row? Let's try it by sending a null value to the onTap. So here it's nullable and we are unwrapping a null value and calling the function. Refresh the UI and tap on the list. So it's saying we are trying to do a null check operator on a null value. So let's fix this. So here we can simply check if the variable is a null. So we can just add a if condition. If onTap is not null, just call the function by unwrapping it. So that's going to prevent the crash. We still need to unwrap it. Okay. Refresh the UI and let's see if it is working. Tap on the list. So there is no error. So that means the onTap is not being called. So if we put a breakpoint there, it's null. So it's not going to call that function. Let's go back to the place where we are calling this onTap method and pass in a function, a proper function, and just print it out on tap. All right. So when we tap on the list row, so it will print onTap. Next, let's try to send some parameter back when we tap on the list row. We'll try to send the user object itself. So accept a parameter. So I want to show that even the parameter can be nullable. So here the user can be null. And let's try to print out the values when we tap on a list row. So user.name. So you can see that it's showing some error. That's because the user can be null, right? So Flutter is saying that you're trying to call name on a variable that can be null. So we can unwrap it in two ways, either using the exclamation mark or the question mark. So I'm using the question mark here. So if it is null, it's not going to crash your application. It will just gracefully stop there. If you're using the exclamation mark, it will try to unwrap even if it is null, and it may crash your application. So here we are getting the proper username on which we are tapping. Now let's try to send the null value itself. What if the parameter itself is null? And if we tap, it will just print null because we are using the question mark. Let's try to use the exclamation mark and tap on the list row. So it's going to crash your application. So you can see the crash log. it's trying to say the same error, null check operator or a null value. So we should be very careful when we use the exclamation operator. And again, if you want to really use the exclamation operator, you can just wrap the user with the statement with a null check. So I'm just replacing the exclamation with a question mark, and you can use like this. If it is not null, you can put it inside. Now Flutter is going to say that we don't need the question mark because we already have the null check. So refresh the UI and tap on it. So since it is null, it's not going to print anything. It will not go inside. So let's change it back to the user and tap on it. You can see that it's printing the values because it's not null now. Now what if let's try to print the user.email. Tap. Okay, it's printing well. Now I'll remove the question mark from the parameter. Now Flutter is going to say that we don't need the if condition because it can now be null. Alright, and let's go to the user list row, and if you want you can have a null check here, but that's unnecessary for this widget, so we don't need this. And also here it's saying that user can now be null, so we don't need this. Refresh. Alright, let me align the UI a little bit. Alright, after this, let's try to show the error that's coming from the service. And for that, I'm going to declare a variable string error, and it will be an error because we haven't initialized it yet. So to fix it, we can just add a late keyword in front of it. So that way, we are promising the compiler that we will be initializing it before we are accessing it. So what if we are trying to access it without initializing? Save it. So it's going to say late initialization error because we haven't initialized it. So let's initialize it in the init state. I'm initializing it to empty. Refresh the UI. Now there is no error because it has some value. So for now, let me remove the late keyword and directly initialize it here itself, and remove the statement in the init state. And we are gonna display the error in the UI, whatever is coming from the service. So we may need to break the service to display the error in the text view here. Now let's go to the function that actually calls the service to get the data. That's get services. And in the failure block, we are gonna assign the error variable to result dot, that would be error response, as string, because our errors were assigned a string. Let's go to the function. So here we had assigned error response as a string. It can be anything because it's an object. So assign it to a string and call setState to refresh the UI. The next thing is we need to make some error in the service so that it will fail. So okay, so that's gonna fail. It says invalid response. So that's the error that we are getting, and it is displayed in the text here. So let's wrap it inside a visibility widget, and we are going to say if the error is empty, then we are going to hide it. Refresh. Now it's error, so it is visible. And let's go to the user services and undo the error. Reload the UI. Now there is no error, so it is invisible and it displays the data. So the next thing we are going to do is we'll create a new screen that will display the user details when the user taps on the list row. So let's create a new stateless widget, that is user underscore details dot user details screen, and import the material package. So this widget requires a user object. So user, I'm gonna not make it nullable because we need it in this screen, so I'm gonna make it required. So required this dot user. Let's create a UI. So scaffold, the body container, and it's going to have a child which is a column, and children, let's display the name. Let's move the name to the up bar. So up bar with a title. Let's copy that and paste it in the up bar. So that's the title, and in the body we'll display the email. This is an error because email is nullable. So the text view cannot accept a null value, so it's complaining. So we can fix it by using the exclamation mark at the end by unwrapping it, or you can use the double question mark, and which is a shorthand for null check, and if it is null, set it empty. Alright, now let's open the user details screen when the user taps on the list row. So navigator.push, pass in the context and a material page route, and the builder will have the context. So return the user details screen and pass in the user. So that's it for navigation. Refresh the UI and tap on the list row. You can see the email and the name there. Let me give it a padding of 20. Alright, looks good. Okay, now let's go to the home screen, and when the user taps on the list row, let's try to make the email null. So user dot email is equal to null. It's an error because the email is a final string. So for now I'm just removing the final keyword, so that will remove the error for now in the home screen. And when we tap on the list row, let's see what happens. So there is an error because we are trying to unwrap a null value, and user.email is null. So if it is null, we are trying to set it empty now. So it is empty. Let's give it some value. Let's say no email. So it's going to display no email. So that's one way. We have already learned it, so I just showed it once more. So I'm undoing it and remove the email from here. Let me try to refresh the UI, so that will clear off this error. Okay, working good. So the next thing is, let's go to the user details and we'll try to display the user address. So we made the address as nullable. So user.address dot, let's say city. So it will be an error because the text view cannot accept a null value. So let's try to unwrap each value. So you know that city is nullable and also address is nullable. So unwrap the city, alright, but still there is an error because address can be null, right? So we can put a question mark there, but still it's going to return, it won't crash it, but it's going to return a null value which is not acceptable by the text. So we can just use the exclamation mark to unwrap it for now. So that will clear our error and it will display the data in the UI because we already have the data. It's not actually null. So later we'll try to make it null and see what happens and see how we can fix it. So address, you know that it's nullable. City is also nullable. Now let's try to do the same thing with the company object, which was actually non-nullable, but the name inside the company object is actually nullable, so it can be null. So the text cannot accept a null and it's throwing the error. So we added an exclamation to unwrap it. So let's fix it the proper way. We'll give it a default value and make it non-nullable, and in the service where we are parsing the data, if it is null, we will try to set it to empty instead of null. So even if the service returns a null, we won't return null. We'll just set it to empty. So we can just remove the exclamation mark because it was showing a warning, because the name is non-nullable now and we don't need any kind of operators there. So the next thing is I'll show something that you commonly see in some of the applications which actually doesn't properly handle null values, and it might result in an improper UI. So I just appended a company string to the company name, and let me go to the string name. I'll make it nullable, and let's go to the, I'm gonna remove the final for now just to assign it to a different value. And let me go to the address. Let's go to the address city, also remove the final from there because I want to assign it to null and show you something. So let me assign it. So user dot address dot city is equal to null. Let's unwrap the address. Okay, and refresh the UI, and when we tap on the list, because we are trying to unwrap a null value, it's resulting in error. So let me append it to a string city colon and display the city. Refresh the UI and tap on the list, and we're still trying to unwrap the city, which is null. That's why this error. So we'll remove the exclamation mark from the city and don't try to unwrap it. And if I resume, you can see that city is actually printing a null string. So this you might see in some of the other applications which is not handling the null properly. So you must be careful in handling this. Give it a proper value or check for nulls. If it is a null value, don't try to display it, or whatever the logic may be. So this is one thing I want to show you. And one more final tip. So let me declare a class. I'm gonna say class test and declare int x is equal to 0, and another variable int y is equal to, I'm gonna say x plus 1. So this is going to result in error, and if I want to fix this, I can simply make the integer y a late, so it will initialize it later when x is initialized. And what if I want to give x a default value? So let me write a function integer get default value, and that's going to return, let me say 100. Sorry, I need to make it a arrow function. Okay, and if I use the default value in x, it's going to result in the error because it is not a late initializer. So you can easily fix it like this. So this is an extra tip if you want to use it somewhere in the UI or anywhere. So that's all about null safety in Flutter. So If you want to watch the first part of the tutorial, I'll be providing the link to it in the description. The link to the source code also will be provided in the description, so please don't forget to check it out. You can switch to the Null Safety branch and simply run it. You don't need any extra changes there. So if you found this video useful, please don't forget to like, subscribe and share. That will be a big support for me. And if you have any kind of doubts, you can just comment it below this video. I will try to reply as soon as possible. Yeah, so thanks for watching and see you in the next video. Until then, bye.